I first got to know Myra Grant years ago when I moved to the area, and she was announced as one of the sort of deans of the nonprofit world in the region around Asheville, and she earned every bit of that. I'm going to be so bold as to say that those of you who are sitting at the table where I ate lunch might even want to move up here to this table. But don't have to, you know, it's up to you. But anyway, before I do, I want to bring back what Heather Dawes said a minute ago when she introduced herself. And there are a number of bills that are being introduced in the state legislature on nonprofit issues and how they're going to impact residency status and you know, nonprofit, how we pay taxes and that sort of thing. Is there anybody in here today who knows a lot about those bills? Because I'll be honest with you, I don't. I keep getting asked about it. All right, but it's there's a lot of stuff being done.
Let me just say, just briefly, Allan. I'm on the board of the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits, which is, you know, most of you know from Jane Kendall and that crowd, and I know you've got the affiliates and the efforts of hands-on down here. We just had a board meeting last week. I was unable to attend, but in the packet was a grid of the current tax scenarios and impacts on nonprofits. I'll make sure to send it to you. And if you find it of value, we can distribute it to the crowd or have it on your website.
I'd love it if you.
It's a nice summation of what was going on.
Okay, and you don't have it online, but you got it.
No, and I can't. I see it, but I can't access it here.
Okay.
It may be at the center website right now.
All right, and what we're going to do is we're going to try and figure out a way to get this available to everybody, so that you can kind of follow it, and if you're of a mind, jump in with your favorite legislator who listens to everything that you say and does everything you want them to do. I'm very, very glad to introduce Myra and Allan Burrows today. There's a huge need for what they're going to talk to us about today, and without further ado, I'll start with Myra. Thank you.
We're going to talk about a topic today that's sometimes not too exciting, but very important. So, if you are a staff person at the development level or executive director, it'll be important for you to hear. So, let's just say one of you as a staff walks into your director's office and says, I just met with this great donor and they want to give us used toilet fixtures. And I said, yes. So Cindy pulled herself off the ceiling, said, why did we not pass those gift policies last week? What were we thinking? So that is opening. Why should we have gift policies, giving policies, gift receipt policies, whatever you want to call them? Well, some of it is basically cover your part of your body for problems you might get into. But they provide one set of policies, not all the set of policies that maybe your organization needs. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about the breadth of policies that you might have. But they will define the board versus the staff responsibilities in accepting gifts. They would define how you recognize gifts, how you talk to the donor about what they've given. They will define the standards that you want as an organization, because Debbie might be accepting used toilets, but Greg won't, because the mission of your organization should drive what your gift policies are. So if the person next to you may be accepting land, but it might not be in your benefit to do that. Or they might be accepting collectibles, it might be not be in your benefit to do that. It gives you a guideline for how volunteers interact with donors and talk about gifts. It gives you a way to promote for your organization and market the kind of gifts that you want, anything from estate to trust to cash to stock to any type of other type of gift. They should sync with how you report your financials, how you prepare your 990. So who in the room has looked at a 990? Well, that's good. That's good. So, Financial Accounting Standards Board, when it says FASB regulations 116 and 117, have been around since 1993, 1994. They form the basis for what your financials look like and how you report revenue and gifts, whether they're current or for use in the future, deferred. How you will record those gifts and how you'll recognize them as revenue if they are deferred. And as well, it relates to the 990. So there are many attachments to the 990, which is the nonprofit's tax form, one of which is Schedule M, and that has to do with non-cash gifts. So it could be collectibles, it could be land, it could be stock. So those are just, you should take a look at a 990, even if you're not responsible for the preparation of it, and know the schedules and know what's required in putting it together. But your policies ought to relate to that regulations for FASB and for the 990. So what should we include? What are the elements in gift policies? So first I said, let's start with the mission and the purpose of your organization. State that up front. And my experience at Pardee, which is just one of the places that I work, we had an attorney who had a particular format in mind that he wanted. Ended up being 80-something pages. Let's just say it was thorough, for those of you who know Mr. Scott Liebensberger. But it was a good learning experience in putting it together. Probably the most important part of that 80 pages was the mission statement up front and the summary at the end. But in between, it had lots of detail about the types of gifts that would be accepted. And in our case, we had to sync with the hospital and what the hospital's needs were, and would they need land if it came available. So you had that synergy going on, but it did relate to the mission, and there were some gifts that we decided not to accept. Conflict of interest is another policy, and Allan talked a little bit more about that. You ought to have a conflict of interest statement for your board. Doesn't have to be in your gift policies, but let's just say this person who used toilets was on your board, and the staff person already said yes, so then how are you going to backpedal on that gift? And was that person's business? Had they signed a conflict of interest that said, you could accept a gift or not accept a gift? For some types of gifts, do you need legal counsel? Will you pay for it? Will the donor pay for the legal counsel? You might need an environmental impact study for a piece of land, or in my case, the second day I was at work, the board chair had found a gas station.
Oh, yeah.
The pump's still there. Thought it was great. Let's take that. No, let's don't. Let's check this out first. But, are you going to pay for the environmental impact, or is the donor going to pay for that? And then what levels approvals do you need in accepting gifts? Executive director could accept some. You might need finance committee for others, board for others. And if you have restricted gifts, are they ones you can use now or in the future, and how do you define what those are? There might be some forms that you need to include in your policy of information about the gift, value of the gift. You may need policy on investment. You may have some donors who give you stock and they've had that for such a long time and they want to tell you when to sell it. So should you be in the market timing business? Probably not. So should you sell it right away? But you should say that, you should say that in your policies. And this is not a one-time kind of process. It's ongoing. And how often should you review and change your policies and bring them up to date? Because they are impacted by IRS changes, our state tax changes, and other things that are going on in our world around us. So those are just some of the things that you ought to look at, when you're getting into the business of starting gift policies. And so I'm going to let Allan take on a couple of other issues and how we get to where we have a nonprofit.
Thanks, Myra. I think Myra brought me in here for the comic relief of today because she's much more knowledgeable about the day-to-day of policies than I am. But I'm excited to be here. I'm Allan Burrows, President of Capital Development Services. We've been around 30 years, founded in Raleigh, based now in Winston-Salem, and we work with a lot of you. We work with hospitals, museums, churches, habitats, you name it, we seem to have crossed the gamut across the world. And I've been doing this since 1986. And I've had a lot of strange gifts come my way. I'm curious, what is your strangest gift? Somebody give me an opportunity. What is your strangest gift that you've ever been approached about? And we're talking work related. I'm not talking about anything else. Well, we're on film too, so.
How about I've gotten several diamond engagement rings.
Yeah.
From
Estate jewelry.
Really didn't want them anymore.
I said estate, but there are other variables of when you receive those types of gifts. Who else, Jim?
We had a donor wanting to give us an island in the Tuckasegee River for research purposes.
An island in the Tuckasegee River for research purposes.
For our natural sciences and geosciences program, which they thankfully did not feel that would add value to their program. That was the easiest way to say no.
Yeah, fascinating. Anybody else? It's just a strange gift. Greg.
An uninspected, uncoded, unfinished home and 6 acres, which was taken prior to me coming.
Uninspected.
So it's basically somebody built a house. Didn't go through the proper channels.
In this.
On 6 acres, bad property, bad. So we spent about $15,000 just to get out from it.
Wow. Wow. Anybody else? Yes.
A full series of mint condition Ranger Vic comic books at mint service.
Now that is a value. Ranger Rick was a value for those who didn't hear her. Yes.
One of the things that's not such a strange gift, but when you get left a piece of property or so forth in someone's estate,
Right.
And you have to deal with it both in relation to the donor's family, or in our case, it seems like people, those of you from Florida, I mean, Florida, Lehigh Acres, it sits back in the middle of nowhere, and it seems like we were always getting some piece of property in the Lehigh Acres. So you do need to know how to deal with that.
Well,
policies are good.
And I bring that up because no matter what size you are as an organization, you could be, my first organization was a relatively decent sized organization. I started in August of 1986. And in October of that year, my development director said, Allan, jump in the car with me. We've got this gift opportunity in Raleigh we've got to go check out. I said, it's fantastic. This is cool. This is what it's all about, isn't it? We want to get money. We want to get gifts. And we're driving to Raleigh, and we said, trustee's going to meet us at this, behind the store of this convenience store area. We're there, and this guy says, here's the deed to the property, and I don't know what's going on yet. And he says, here it is. I said, all right, property gift. This is fantastic. It's exciting. It was a cemetery, folks. It was an actual cemetery on Newbern Avenue in Raleigh. It's the big one that's down there. He owned it. And he wanted part of it, he wanted to get rid of it off his tax books, off his estate. He passed it on to our organization. Quite frankly, I thought it was fantastic. I thought, a gift. Yeah, I didn't know, because I was trained to say yes. We are trained as development officers never to say no. No is a bad word in our world. But yet, here's an instance where I am jumping for joy. My development director, who had a few more years experience than I did, wisely said, thank you for considering us. in your vision and plans of working with your estate. We would love to sit down with you and really explore about how best to do that. He never said receiving that gift. And I'll tell you later on what happened to that element. It was actually accepted, by the way, eventually, as a gift, but then it was turned because we found a buyer before we accepted the gift. Why do I bring those all up? Because as you can see, no matter what size the organization is, having some type of set policies and reviewing those policies as much as not just gift acceptance, but others, personnel issues and all that stuff. Any non-for-profit, more so today than ever before. I mean, after doing this for 30 years, life is becoming more scrutinizing, more factual, more accountability than I've seen. Transparency, those words, you know the words. They become so readily available because they're at your fingertips. You can check out an organization through Charity Navigator, through their websites. There's so much available today that not that we should not have been in the transparency forum 20 years ago, but just today, it is that much more critical in the mindset of it as much as it is to you from the integrity and accountability and fiduciary responsibility of the board. That said, how many of you have gift acceptance policies and types of gift acceptance policies? Okay. How many do you review them on an annual basis? My encouragement is to review them on an annual basis. Why? Primarily because, and sort of what we're going to talk about the steps of developing these gift policies, is primarily because the gift opportunities change. Intellectual property was never, there was no connotation of that word 20 years ago. That meant IBM. That meant one of those mainframes, in my opinion. Today, there's so much value placed on those elements, and those can be gifted, and those have been gifted. And the question to you is, are you even ready to accept those types of opportunities? And do you have to? And does that fit to core mission? I think what Myra said earlier about that document, the 80-some page document, the most critical part is mission always comes first. Make sure that whatever document produced always goes back to that one document, that the mission state is very clear. So therefore, there may be a mission creep opportunity when there's an island in Tuckasegee River, but you go back to core. Is that a value to you? And being trained in the art of wanting everybody to say yes, it is hard for us sometimes to say, you know, that's a grand opportunity. We're not the best organization suited to receive that gift. Or whatever language you want to use to infer that we cannot accept that gift. You can always pull policies out. Love to, but can't. Section A, subsection 2, paragraph 3 says, sorry, we can't do that because it doesn't perk, or whatever that issue is. So long story short is, how do you even get a policy or then review a policy? One way to do it is simply think about the inventory of current gifts that you've received. That's why I asked you the question, what types of gifts you received? And when Alex said we get diamond rings from a lot of just interested women who want to move on to a new diamond ring. How about that? Or man. And but long story short is there's an opportunity there to reflect on current status. What is our policy on jewelry? What's our policy on any antique pieces or whatever those things are? We're working with a client in Statesville, and there's a gentleman in Statesville had the largest private gun collection in North America. And he wanted to do something with it. He was in his 70s at the time. He's still living. Wanted to do something with it. And he came to the community college, came to Mitchell Community College, and said, I want to give you my gun collection. And the Mitchell Community College, chomping at the bit because this is a family of some means, and we were in the middle of a campaign, and we were hoping they were going to make a sizable campaign, get to, hey, we get this, they'll do that as well. No. They thought, well, maybe we could tie it into our law enforcement programs. We'll use it to show law enforcement all types of guns that could be against them in the public. And the debate went on. And the problem was the stipulations, not only because it would have been great if it had been a gift that they could ride around and turn and sell. But the problem was, this guy said, no. You got to keep it all together. And you got to display it. So, no way can Mitchell College accept this gift. And they politely said, that's fantastic. You know, to keep that integrity of that gift, you need to think elsewhere. NRA, Smithsonian, wherever those places were. And I forgot, it's one of those two that he ended up working the deal out with. He still made a gift to Mitchell. It was probably not as great as it could have been. Yes?
So would it have been acceptable to have accepted it if you could turn around and sell it?
I think that's where the policy comes into play.
But when you're developing the policy.
Yeah. I think you think outcomes.
I get torn with
part of it is to think outcome. If the outcome of the gift can fulfill mission obligation, meaning the outcome of the gift receipt is that you can turn around and sell it, the proceeds of which will help you. That's important.
Well, and if you sell it, does it relate to your mission? And are you going to end up having to pay unrelated business income?
Right.
Which you don't want to do. So
Yeah, there's a lot of variables on the surface level of accepting is one thing, and that we have an idea what we're going to do with it. But then there's all these sort of subsets, depending on what the property is or what the issue is, what the item is, that causes either business tax related issues or sellable issues. All those factors come into play. We got a home, I remember the first 2 years of working in this organization, right there in Wednesday Country Club. As you drive up, one of the first houses on the right was a donation to us, and it was one of those life type scenarios. She got to live in the house for the better part of her, and I think it was about 8 more years when she lived in the house before she passed away. The house came to us, and then we put it on the market, and this was in one of those recessions around 1990, 80, whenever it was, I can't remember. And it took a while to sell, so it was on our books, and we had to deal with a lot of those issues. But all that to say is one of the first things to do as you think about your policy is simply sort of think about what types of gifts we currently accept or have accepted or, my gosh, been offered, and how do we address those issues. Secondly is you can think about it in terms of looking at best practices. Look at what if you're a college, look at what other colleges do. If you're a food bank, what other food banks are doing? Are there some national, if you're real tied in Red Cross, national organizations have lots of good templates of information. And if you're not in a national, talk among your peers. What type of policies do you have? And compare and contrast. I don't know if the local network provides that. I know the center provides some of that in Raleigh. As I told Myra, we've got some templates that I'm happy to pass on to you. Again, these are very generic in principle, but it gives you a starting point. And then from that, another thing was then don't let the development officers alone set your policy. Because we as development officers, we're going to be pretty broad range about what we want because our job is to bring stuff in the doorway. And so the catches is provided through obviously a discourse, but not only the development office, but with the accounting office and your board. And have a committee established that would sort of review those, craft those, or either edit those and review those on an annual basis. And I mean annual because I do think there's enough changes in the market dynamics, there's much changes in tax consequences that you should at least, sometimes gift annuities are the best things in sliced bread, sometimes you don't want to touch them with a 10-foot pole. Depends on what's going on in the marketplace and things of that nature. So therefore, you should constantly sort of be in mind what's going on with your policies. The other thing is then, and the last part of this section is simply think about what future gifts. I brought up the intellectual properties. Those are a new kind of gift. Sub-S corporation folks have the ability sometimes to transfer their percent of the company. That might be where they want to sell their estate. Is we want to establish it into a foundation, we want to give it to a healthcare, whatever that is. How do you address that? What are the future gift opportunities that may exist for you? And quite frankly, like the sub-S scenario, you need to see the contracts and the deals because just like a piece of land, there may be debt associated with this, there may be back taxes, all those components. This person may not, well, he says he's got or she has 30% of the company, and it turns out that 30% is still 10 years in the making, meaning they're still owing for that piece of the pie, if you will. A lot of variables. It's something you can look through. But if you have this set of policies, that you can review annually, you should be in a point to at least use a frame of reference in your dialogue with donors.
Just wondering about physical property that's left you in somebody's will. Is there a way that you can accept or reject that, or is it just legally?
What did y'all do?
We accepted it, but it just, it laid around on our books for a long time.
Yeah.
And we didn't have to worry about whether it was mission oriented, mission related.
Yeah.
Because, we just had property.
You have the ability to say no, even in an estate gift. When you get the notice from the lawyers, you've been donated 2.4 acres of property that's 2 miles off the coast of North Carolina. It used to be part of North Carolina, but it's not anymore. You can say thank you, but we don't have that opportunity.
Yeah. We had several pieces that were given in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, yeah.
And the best of all scenarios is to have that relationship with the donor when they're developing this document, and you can work with that legal counsel and hopefully sell it and you just get the cash at the end. But that happens once in a while.
Yeah, you've got, my encouragement is whatever you do, have the eyes of the legal professional review. There's a strong, either you pay it or somebody's willing to give you some in-kind time to review whatever policy is in place. They won't hold you necessarily, you won't necessarily hold them responsible if something does happen, but in essence, you probably need some legal, and maybe somebody on the committee could serve in a pro bono capacity for you, just to review it with you. I would also encourage you, if you don't have, and most organizations wisely do have some type of connections to legal advice, because those instances, generally what we did as organizations just pass it on to the attorneys and says, in general, we do not want this, but you read through the paperwork and tell us, is it a good thing, bad thing, or what the consequences could be. So that's a strong encouragement to any organization. Because I am not, as I told Myra, I'm not an accountant, I'm not an attorney. Although I did sleep in a Holiday Inn Select last night. The two scenarios that we wanted to give you, and then I'll turn it back over to Myra, is we wrote them down for you. And the first one is a well-intentioned board member calls the executive director and relays that a local business is going out of business and wants to donate their building and land to your foundation. The business is a former site of a gas station and an auto garage. What kind of gift, what would you have, what do you need to have as a policy? And I know I'm on camera, so I need to stay behind here. What kind of policies would you want? One that would what?
As the types of property that we would accept.
What types of property to accept? Yeah. And what to do with property that may, I didn't say are or is, but may be contaminated. And if a former site of a gas station, there's a high probability, not an exact probability, that there may be some leakage and long-term environmental impact. What Myra said earlier, make sure the policy states who will pay for the environmental impact. The donor wants to just throw it off their books, you take care of it. It may be the policy states we will accept it on these conditions, one of which you pay for, you the donor, pay for the environmental impact study. Again, it's a variance that you have to decide what's the relevance to your organization.
And there's an opportunity, you all talked about this as a group a couple months ago, about the pressure and the need to meet goals in the fundraising world can sometimes drive what you accept and don't accept. But, you know, ethics are at the base of all those kind of decisions, so it's okay to say no sometimes. I would say don't get caught in the pressures of the meeting the goals.
Yeah.
To make something.
Yes.
You've equivocated a little bit on the environmental phase one, and I just, everything I've ever done and heard is that we need to say up front in our policy that the donor is responsible for paying for the appraisal and the phase one, not only because of the environmental problems, but because of a family member that want to make a test the will or the gift.
Right.
And is there any time when you wouldn't put that in?
I'm a firm believer, yes, you should state that policy, but I've seen instances where the policies have made exception.
Really?
Meaning the organization says, you know, there's bigger fish here. If we just accept the fact that even though we state we want to do an environmental impact study that you have to pay for, there's some other factors to play, greater good, but also greater opportunity, that the organization says, you know, if that's going to be a dividing line, we got to make a determination whether or not to accept it or not, and the committee says, let's accept it, let's pay for it ourselves. Now, with that comes responsibility, and typically what that does, though, is they typically more than one environmental impact study. They do three, up to three. And that way, there's a little bit of diminished responsibility, liability if you get three, so to speak. So it's a variance depending on, again, organization, culture, but I agree with Alex. The typical policy would state that it's typically on the behest of the donor to determine the impact and to pay for the impact study.
Well, the phase one generally is less than $1,000.
Correct. It's pretty low key.
But that, I forget who said they had the house at the country club.
Mm-hmm.
You know, most likely that had been a paint factory.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Yes.
I was going to say, what a great opportunity to engage a board member here and helping, not just being like, well, yes, we can or can't, but having to walk through the process with you too. You know, okay, this is what, okay, if you have somebody approaches a board member, let's think about these things and educating them and having that board member engaged in that process, I think ties them to the organization. To your point earlier about staff and board responsibilities as to what they can accept, what they can't, because a lot of times the board like to think they're extension of staff.
Yeah.
And so maybe say things that they can't really, the staff really can't commit to.
And I know we're talking, and that's a good point. So I think what we're talking about, I've made the cemetery discussion. the arms. We're also talking about cash with restrictions. I mean, a lot, the simplistic ways. You know, it sounds like, oh, we don't have to worry about that. If we had another scenario, I remember this distinctly, where the woman she wanted to leave $500,000 to the organization. But the only thing the organization had to do was maintain the checkbook of her dog. And maintain the dog after her life.
Did you say daughter or dog?
Dog, D-O-G as an animal. The dog had its own checkbook that used a paw print for its signature with a local bank. It bought the uniforms for the local high school band. This is a true story. It bought the uniforms for the high school band with its paw print. It got to be the lead dog, for lack of a better term, in the parade for homecoming. And she wanted to leave $500,000 because she was a widow. She had no children. She said, I'm going to leave you $500,000, and all you have to do is just make sure the dog stays happy, and whatever the dog needs over the coming years, you can use her checkbook for.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm just telling you, the myriad of opportunity exists out there. Policies will define what you can and cannot accept. I think a lot of it, I go back to, those are the fun stories. But truly, there's many gifts we see, I've got $10,000, but it has to go to these things. And again, in the psyche of a development officer, we want to say, sure, it's exactly what we want. $10,000, I forget about the ... behind it. We've got to be very careful, because that's what gets the organization. We are not technically the only person in that organization that can say, most likely or not, the person that can truly accept that gift. So long story short is a policy in place helps you with that. The other scenario is a donor calls and wants to give their entire estate valued at $2 million to your organization, revising the will and estate documents. You provide children's services. The donor says, well, I want to restrict the gift to building a health center for low income on your property. What do you do with that? And don't say, well, we just look at our policy. What would you do with it?
Find appropriate receiver.
Find a more mission appropriate receiver. Yeah.
What about the policy giving you sort of coverage, maybe Myra mentioned that, helping to save face with the donor. We had a board member who wanted to give us some, 4 years ago, units of an LLC that we had our counsel investigated. She touched with his counsel and said, you would be subject to capital calls in the future. I mean, we just didn't want to be part of the gift. Totally infuriated the donor. But here 4 years later, their company has progressed to the point that they actually have an independent appraisal. They've got 3 different classifications of shares, and not really public. We were able to execute a gift because of those policies, and I can send those policies to him and say, this is what we need to do.
Right.
Convene the committee, which is basically our executive committee.
Yeah, and I think the bottom line of that is a great story, because the bottom line is this, these are the tools, the policies are simply the tools to which you can frame some of those dialogues that without them, you're sort of at a loss. There's a sort of the consternation on the part of the donor. They're wondering, why can't you accept this gift? I thought that's what you were, a charity. I mean, you can hear the language, and I've heard those before. And for you to be able to pull out a document that says, let me just show you, we've thought about this. It shows careful thinking, it shows proper planning, which we all know our mothers told us. We know, in an instance, we can refer back to the policy of the state. Grand opportunity, but let me help you understand how we cannot accept these types of gifts. Because ultimately what you don't want is to infuriate anyone. But inevitably, I will tell you, you will. It's just the nature, because some people are trying to use the system. I don't mean that negatively, but a lot of people are trying to appropriate certain ways so they can discount their estate or whatever they are, and they're fast and furious about it. Before you know, you're in somebody's will for whatever that is, and you're, as an organization, without a policy in place, don't know what to do. And then you've got siblings and relatives all clamoring as well. I'll be around to answer questions as well, and I think let's say a few more things before we wrap up.
It's not an easy process. It can take a lot of work. So that's why some of you may not have those guidelines that you need. But once you get policies in place, then what do you do with it? How do you use the policies to get gifts in the door? Do you have the statements you need, the summaries in your newsletters? Does your website include the types of gifts you'll accept? Are you out there with a marketing piece that promotes how donors can give to your organization and allows for that synergy between you and legal counsel? What other kinds of information do you need to provide to your staff on a regular basis? Because it can be an educational process for staff, new staff coming in, reinforcing what the policies are. Board members, a good way to have orientation for your board. Use the policies for that. Use it for continued, education for your board members. I think for me in my workplace, I was always policy driven. Some people are not happy about that. It worked out and we didn't get in trouble. Most often. Most of the time. So I would encourage you, we can provide some examples, as Allan said. Allan has others within capital development or anything you want to follow up with. But we are going to put the presentation for those of you that didn't get a copy on the AFP website. Valerie, I'll get that to you today so that you have it and you can use that with other members of your staff. But Allan and I can entertain whatever questions.
I do have a question. A lot of small nonprofits here. I noticed a number of hands that did not go up for gift acceptance policies. A development director that I worked with closely recently was totally discouraged in developing gift acceptance policies because she needed to be out there raising money. Could not get a board committee or an exec to release some time to help her get what she knew was important because of a couple of conversations she'd had. How do you frame that discussion with your executive director to help him or her understand the critical need?
The director understood the need.
No, the director did not.
The development personnel understood the need. The ED did not.
You let Allan call him with a couple of horror stories.
Yeah.
In some ways, a side example is a good way to show,
today.
if you can find some either instances or articles where somebody had an issue and say, look, this is my concern. You want me out the door raising resources with your help, by the way. That's another topic. But more importantly is I don't want to encounter these scenarios. And more donors, and I go back to the landscape that we're working in today. More scrutiny, more transparency, more accountability than ever before, at least in my 30 years of doing this. And so the more policy-driven, as Myra said earlier, you are, I think the better off you will be as an organization. And truly, the covering the toilet seat area better than any time that I know of. I love the toilet seat thing.
I would encourage that development person to have the institution's attorney talk to the ED.
Or some outside, person.
End runs are
Right.
sometimes tough.
Two things. With your 85-page gift acceptance policy, did you develop a page-and-a-half summary of that for the average donor just to?
Well, we did it internally, number one, and if you look at some of the research sources listed here, you've got to have a summary because who the heck is going to read through 85 pages every day? But yes, did that and did the summary kind of piece, ways to give piece for visits with attorneys or use with donors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then the other thing, this is maybe technical. Do I remember, Lloyd, you probably remember this, if you're doing a bargain sale, don't you have to, with IRS laws, not have a prearranged buyer? Am I right about remembering that? Okay, so the cemetery thing, for example, is okay unless you're doing a formal bargain sale.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. You want to be very transparent on
Yeah.
And someone said something about, I guess Allan said something about gift annuities. So a couple of years ago, and still we have this push on gift annuities, which is an agreement between you and the donor to pay income for life on a gift that they make, and they get a percentage of tax deduction. The kicker is, in the small organizations in North Carolina, regulations say you have to have $100,000 not encumbered to issue gift annuity. And you have to register those with the Department of Insurance. The first, you have to make that statement that the Department of Insurance provides for you. So, while it might seem like a great idea, is it the right thing to do? Can you make the payments? Are you endangering your organization? Do you have enough assets to do that? So, they're easy. You don't have to always have legal counsel. It's good to have legal counsel, but they can be easier than the trust documents. That's one of the factors.
Okay, newly converted, that
Yeah.
you need to do this, but is there some sort of a template on, 85 pages isn't something
No,
we're going to want to do, but is there some sort of a good template that gives you, here are the 12 items that need to be included?
Well, I think one way to start is take that I'll give you a copy. I brought the Schedule M. Okay, Schedule M in the 990 says, you've got to show, did you receive any of these? But it goes down through the list of cash, securities, land, intellectual property, collectibles, food inventory, which you're already dealing with. And it's a good list, and it defines what types of things that you might accept non-cash. So, it's a good thing to start with, but yeah, there are plenty of templates out
Yeah,
there.
and two for-profit organizations, Grant Thornton, we're one of the accounting sort of consultancy groups out there, as well as Wells Fargo Philanthropic. Those are just two that I know have good sort of standards that they encourage nonprofits to use. And so I'm sure other banks, other resources like that would be of some help. The Community Foundation typically has some resource for you as well.
Wells Fargo typically does either here or Greensboro area. I think it's our turn to be
Yeah, I think you're coming.
one of the areas for Wells Fargo's philanthropic conference. So anybody with an ear to Wells Fargo might suggest a topic.
Yeah.
All right, can we have a round of applause?
Thank you.
All it takes is one really scary negative experience for a nonprofit, and they get on board with a gift acceptance policy really quickly. So thank you all very much. Next month, I want you to know that we try and do something informed with our luncheon series on Plain Giving every year. We've got two great Plain Giving people. Lloyd Horton is a CFRE and FAHP, lots of experience in Plain Giving, and he and Cheryl Aikman. Cheryl, is Vice President for Development at the Community Foundation of Western North Carolina. They're going to be here talking about Plain Giving and how to absolutely implement a successful program. All right, let's stop talking about it and do it. All right, see you all next month.